Welcome to Tokyo Game Life, a Tokyo-based video game podcast focusing on Nintendo and gaming culture in Japan's capital. Your host Mono here to bring you a slice of gaming life from Tokyo. The Tears of the Kingdom hype is building up in Japan, but before we can dig into that game, let's pay homage to some old-school Zelda. I'm joined by Zelda preservationist History of Hyrule to chat about retro Zelda art, magazines, guides, and how it's being made available for modern audiences. And in the game section, I finally dig into Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. Plus, news about lost video games and Slowpoke Parks. Let's jump right into the feature on retro Zelda art preservation with History of Hyrule. Tokyo Game Life, only on the Tokyo Beat Podcast Network. We're all looking forward to Tears of the Kingdom, but for this week's feature, I want to look back to a unique era of Zelda art that would be lost to time if it wasn't for the efforts of preservationists who have made thousands of amazing art pieces available for fans today. And joining me is a special guest who knows all about preserving retro Zelda art. So guest, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Melara Hart, and I run History of Hyrule.
Thanks for joining me. Let's dig into the History of Hyrule project. Can you tell us the origins of the project and how you got interested in preserving Zelda art?
Yeah, back in the very start of the 2000s, I was looking for online Zelda art that I had really loved as a child. And most people know it. It would be the Katsuya Chirata art from the Nintendo Player's Guide. It was gorgeous. It was my favorite thing as a kid. My friend kind of ran off with my book when she moved, and I had spent about 10 years looking for another copy of it. So when I found it, I was determined to get it online so people wouldn't miss that art again, because I knew I couldn't be the only one who loved how amazing that Player's Guide was. And that's basically how I started my site. There weren't a ton of Zelda websites at the time. There were some really good ones for walkthroughs and gameplay and a little bit of news because Ocarina of Time was going to come out in a few years. But there weren't a lot of good ones for the history of Hyrule. The first 4 games is what I wanted to focus on. Everything had been like Ocarina of Time fan sites. So while there was a really great one called like Zelda Legends, and Zelda Dungeon was really great for actual games themselves, I wanted to make something that was more focused on art and more focused on filling in the gap on what people were not finding in other places. So basically it was like everyone's doing other stuff really well, but the stuff I love, I'm not quite finding it. So I wanted to be able to kind of do that and bring that to people. So that's the origin story.
So was that guidebook with the Terada art, was that the first thing you ever scanned and preserved?
Yeah, you know what? It probably was. I had a scanner because I'm a traditional artist. I was a kid, or a late teen, I guess, because scanners were still pretty new for home use. So it did help that I already had one. And that probably was like the first book I scanned. I think very shortly after that, I scanned another Japanese guide that I had because we couldn't figure out what the names were for the bad guys for Link to the Past, like the actual Japanese names, because in the Player's Guide and in Nintendo Power, they kind of just made up names, so it was kind of like, well, what are they really? And that kind of, I don't speak or read Japanese, but I was able to get that onto some forums where people were actually trying to figure out kind of like the precursor to like all the timeline stuff, the differences in the translation notes. What does the Japanese manual say versus the US manual? And, doing a lot of the comparisons for like the in-game texts from the Japanese games and the US games. So it was really fun to kind of be in the community that early and see people discovering all those differences. And the art's what got me into it, but it's been nice to be able to contribute to other aspects and have people that focus on other things they help a lot in regards to what I do too. So it's kind of a mutual effort, I think.
Walk me through the preservation process. Let's say you get a new Zelda 1 guidebook that has never been scanned or posted on the internet before. What steps do you undergo to make it available to the public?
Yeah, I used to not want to damage the books at all, but now basically I debind everything. I don't scan a lot of magazines. That's probably going to change soon. They're a lot easier to take apart usually because it's just a staple in the middle.
Hmm.
The old books, the guides and stuff have different levels of frustrating glue. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it's already pretty petrified and you can just crack the binding and the pages fall out. And that makes it very easy to make just beautifully flat scans. So, the first thing I'll do is essentially scan the covers, the jackets, and the actual cover itself. Pretty high resolution at 2400 DPI because those are going to be the ones that are most at risk at being damaged. So I might as well just make one good scan of those at a really high resolution. And then I start taking the pages out. Sometimes you actually have to kind of cut part of the binding away, which is really sad. So I never used to want to do it. Some of these things, I don't know if I'm ever going to find another copy again. So essentially, I'm just destroying a whole collection. But I figured if someone does it well once, no one will ever have to do it again. So why not just do it right? And from that, yeah, I mean, it's it's kind of a just boring sounding thing, but if people want to know, actually, you know what? I'll use this time to just say how to make good scans.
Hmm.
Flatbed scanners cut off about 2 millimeters around all the sides. I don't know why. So you want a little buffer there so the pages don't go all the way up right to the edge. And instead of using the foam on the scanner lid, you want a rigid board or book or something that just kind of fits perfectly because that will flatten the page really well. You want to make sure all the glue's flicked off, hair, fingerprints, anything that could be on the scanner. And then make sure you use black backing when you're scanning because a lot of people don't notice this until they're like, I don't know, a couple thousand pages in. If you're scanning a regular sheet of paper, the white light bounces back through and you get all of the image on the other side of the paper kind of showing through. And so it kind of ruins the artwork, or you'll get like bleed through with the text and stuff like that. So if you use a black sheet of paper, it does a pretty good job of completely eradicating any image bleed through you'll get from the light from the other side. So that's kind of what you do if you want to scan. And then you just put your head down and just scan for a couple thousand pages. After that, I do all my editing in Photoshop. I don't really like the automatic settings on scanners. You can get scanning, like download scanning profiles or set it up where it can do the work for you. But since I have Photoshop, it's just easier for me to edit everything in Photoshop. And so that's kind of the process. Yeah.
You've been doing this for over 20 years now. Kind of a broad question, but how have the preservation efforts changed in this time?
That's a really good question. So when I first started doing it, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like a girl in her scanner and I didn't debind anything. I was very careful. And I kind of just did as much as I could. I kind of left the internet for a little while, just went on with my life, came back for a little bit. It seemed like no one else was still really doing it. This is about 2010. Got a little bit more done and then left for a little while. When I came back and joined Twitter, it seems like the preservation community has just exploded and it's amazing. There's a really good group called Gaming Alexandria, which if people are just interested in preservation for anything in video games, I would suggest joining their Discord. They have a great scanning guide. They do a lot of just pretty much everything, and they can get you in touch with other groups. But yeah, it's really grown, and I'm really happy to see that because it's amazing. Since I'm kind of in this one little fandom, I lack a lot of knowledge on what like artists have gone and done in other areas or maybe come in and done for Zelda. And it's just kind of really nice and wonderful to be able to find out more about these people. And it's done through other people's like preservation efforts and, kind of going down the rabbit holes and finding out like the career paths of, these game devs and just other people in the industry.
One thing I learned from looking at all the art you've archived is just the sheer amount of unique Zelda art out there, but hidden in guides and magazines and a bunch of other more unorthodox material. What are some of the more surprising pieces of Zelda material you've come across?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's so much fun. I get so excited with how much new old stuff I'm still able to find.
Hmm.
And it's amazing too, because like I'll find little things that I'm like, this has to be like part of the official art set that they just like, they never really used. It was like a cutting room floor art. It wasn't like quite, it's just like that exists and we might get to see it one day. It's amazing with like, when they came out with the more mainstream books like Art and Artifacts and that kind of thing, it showed me that they do actually have some of this stuff that I kind of thought had just been lost. So, with that said, some of the things that I found, especially recently, that just blew my mind was like, so a while ago, there was, I can't remember his screen name right now, but someone posted pictures from, I think it was Shonen Captain, that had like a pink haired Link,
Hmm.
a female Link that went very viral. And they at least had the name of the magazine and I think even the issue number in it. So that was pretty easy to track down. But what I realized was that there were a couple more pieces of art from that set that no one knew where they were from. And it's kind of shocking to me now that I found it that no one knew, because it came full circle kind of with all of our childhoods here in the US, because basically there was another pink-haired Link and another fairy from the same set. We're going through, we're trying to figure out, like, based on the font set, like, what publication could this be from, you know, and that kind of thing. We just couldn't find it. I bought a bunch of issues of Shonen Captain hoping that it would be in like another one or something like that. And essentially what happened is there was this I guess guide for the first game that I had very, very much wanted to find for a long time, but it never comes up for auction. Finally did. I got it. I opened it up and it was in there.
Ooh.
And the amazing thing about it being in there is actually the Japanese equivalent of the US tips and tactics little guide that a lot of people had for the first Legend of Zelda game. It has a gold cover with like blue text. And it was like the one set of cut pages from the inside that they just didn't include, because it also had manga explaining how to like use the map, and explaining manga to Westerners in like the 80s was probably just a bit too much for NOA, so they just cut those pages out, you know. But it was really great because it was like, here was this thing that, you know, everyone was really curious about. We all figured that it was probably just kind of like fan art type feature, you know, in some random comic book magazine. And here it was in an official Nintendo publication, this pink haired female Link from 1986, you know. So that was just really fun to find. Another one that I really love finding was just Family Computer magazine, like Nintendo's standard kind of, you know, I guess official magazine in Japan. I bought an Adventure of Link kind of like compilation guide that they'd put together from some of their issues in there, and realized that there was actually official art for some of the bad guys that we never got here in the US, and I haven't seen it anywhere else in any other publication. It's the same art style. It seems like the same artist is credited. I don't see why it would be another artist like filling in those pieces. And so that was just kind of a really incredible little thing to find. Like, wow, here's it was like Big Bubble, the Fokaroos, or however you say it, the bird creatures in like the Great Palace at the end, just, you know, random things like that. And it was just, it's really nice to be able to have these full sets of art. They end up, you know, filling up wikis. They end up, you know, kind of inspiring people to try out new ways of like drawing things, or, you know, get new ideas for fan fictions and that kind of thing. And it's just really fun to kind of add to the creative community with that art. So those are the two off of my top of the head that just really blew my mind and made me super happy.
There's also been a lot of Zelda manga produced over the years. I think many are pretty familiar with the Akira Himekawa Zelda titles, since a lot of them have been translated into English, but there's a ton beyond that. Could you tell us a bit more about the different types of Zelda manga?
Oh my gosh, yeah, there's so much of it. It's amazing. So I was actually, my friend, we weren't friends at the time, was like the original fan translator of the Himekawa manga. And I kind of, that's when I first realized there was Zelda manga. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I had no idea, you know, there were comics for this outside of the one that was in Nintendo Power, which I think that artist was actually either a teacher or instructor, someone for the Himikawa woman. But anyway, so there's one of my favorites is the Ranmaru manga, which was started in, I think, June of 1986. And it was, I'm sorry, I'm very bad at pronouncing things. It was in 1+2 Comics, and it ran from 86 to 88. It has so many things in the series before they were actually ever in the series. You know, Link's flying on a bird, Zelda transforms into a guy. You know, it's just a whole bunch of stuff that we end up seeing later on. Link has pink hair in it. You know, it's a lot of fun stuff. But the story is actually just really dark and amazing. So I love it for that. It runs 4 volumes. There's a couple early on for Zelda 1 and Adventure of Link that are game guides. So basically, they're showing you how to play the whole game. I was able to speak with one of the artists that did that. I can't remember his name right now. I'm so sorry. But yeah, he pretty much said he was just like, here's the game, make a manga. Manga. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. He got that out pretty quickly, considering. He is also another artist who did art for the Tips and Tactics Guide and Nintendo Power. So that's kind of neat. So in a way, he's, I guess, a semi-official artist. It's this weird line in the early games, what's official art and what isn't, because back then there were just so many kind of like Nintendo of America and Europe would use, you know, stuff that was created by other publication houses in official publications. And then it just goes on. I mean, there's a beautiful one by Ataru Kagawa for Link's Awakening, which we have. I've gotten the translations, like I've found people that translated most of these. I think we only have 2 volumes left. There's like a Dragon Ball one that was done by like one of the Dragon Ball production artists as well. We only have, there's 4 volumes of that. We only have one. The last one needs to be translated. There's so much. I don't know how many volumes there are. There's also a bunch of really cute little ones that appear in magazines from very young children, like first graders up until like 5th grade and stuff like that. And those are just kind of all adorable, and I love them so much. So yeah, there's a lot of it. And it's actually all very enjoyable and fun. People used to kind of write it off as not something, I get that it's not canon, but I think canon is a very fun area to explore in and rule set to stick to if you want. But I also think it's really fun to kind of consider things that may have been influenced by the series and then also possibly influenced it, because we do have interviews with developers saying that they read the manga and, you know, it has actually affected things in the series, like the Rita, the bird race, you know, is basically from that and that kind of thing. And I lost my train of thought, but yes, there's a lot of it and it's great. And I think that there's probably ideas in there that really kind of expand the series and just make it fun in different ways and kind of bring people into it and get their imagination going. And so I really appreciate it for that. So.
A really fun thing you posted recently is art from the 1986 Legend of Zelda board game from Bandai. What is this board game, and how are you able to get such clean images of everything? I mean, it's not like a magazine, so I think it's hard to just put it onto a scanner.
Yeah, it can be really hard to scan physical material because I use a lot of Post-it notes to hold things down because they don't leave residue. And you have to make sure that you're not putting so much weight on like an extended map, because the board game map is huge. I think I had to make 8 or 10 different scans of it just to get the whole thing. And so I didn't want to like press something down on it and create more ridges, although that is a pretty rigid board set. So essentially, yeah, what I would do is the same thing as the pages and everything, is just make sure it's, you know, everything is as clean, flat, and held in place as possible. And then I do the color adjustment and that kind of thing in Photoshop, which really restores it to its original colors. Having it on hand too and being able to see what the colors look like in front of me and having a color corrected screen really helps. And I eventually what I end up doing too is while I offer the raws, like the original scans that are completely unaltered, I do go through and do like a cleaned version because people just like that. Like if they're going to put something on their computer as a wallpaper, or they're going to use it as like an overall display image on like a wiki or something like that, it's nice to be able to take all the creases out to, I want to say sew the different scans together. I can't think of the word for it. And basically just erase the blemishes and that kind of thing. So I like having the original so people can see like this is exactly what it would look like. And then kind of just a cleaned up version where people go, oh, this is really beautiful. And I love doing that with the maps and everything else like that, like taking the text off, taking the lines off, and just giving them an image that's just visually pleasing, but still hopefully as close to the original as possible. So it was a lot of work, but it's relaxing work. So I find it very just cathartic and chill to sit there and just kind of clean an old image up. It's fun.
How does the board game play? Is it like Candyland? Is it like Monopoly? What is the board game exactly?
So that's a good question because I have not played it. So it comes with some really cute figures, and it is actually, some fans have made it playable on Steam. If you search for it online, I know I have a link to it somewhere on my blog, but yeah, it'll be on Steam. Someone made it completely playable and uploaded. There was a board game group that originally made it so you could print it all out. And they have it in English, so you can play it either way now, I assume in Japanese or English. And yeah, there's actually most of the old board games people have been getting online and trying to make sure that you're able to play them. In fact, I think the only things I know of that aren't playable right now are the Choose Your Own Adventure books, which I have and are not translated yet.
Looking at your Flickr account, which houses a lot of the artwork you've uploaded, the game with the most official art is surprisingly the first Legend of Zelda title. Why is there so much art from the very first game of the franchise out there?
This is wild too because I'm not even done with that album. I'm still scanning stuff for it. So there's going to be even more. It's an era. I miss this era in time because I believe there's just so much more art for it because just games and publishing were so different at the time, because perhaps there wasn't so much trademark control over how everything needs to look, like the specifics of each character. Are we going to check the logo? Are we going to check that the colors are all accurate? Go through our legal team to make sure that this represents our product. Back then, I think it was more just like, hey, if you want to make a guide, you're licensed and go for it. And every guide had their own art. Artists were just paid more, or maybe not more, but artists were just hired more to create individualistic art. I think maybe it was a draw to bring in interest for each guide, but I also think it just created interest for the game. I mean, some of it's so futuristic and sci-fi, some of it's like so graphically adorable. It looks like it could be like the perfect little like pins or buttons and patches and stuff. It's all over the place, and I love all of it so much. Yeah, literally every guide I have has different art in it. I also think maybe some of it is, just since there was an email and everything kind of had to be sent around, if you wanted to do a guide, either you had to wait to get art from the studio itself or whoever sent it out, or you just had someone make it. It's funny, one of my favorite maps is from this guide that obviously the person who drew it just really can't draw people very well, but they draw maps really beautifully. And so you just get these little gems everywhere. It's the same for all the magazines with their own little art features. Really the only ones that you saw with official art would be like the ones that Nintendo put out, their family computer magazines and stuff like that. And then later, when you get into the 90s for Link to the Past, you start seeing more official art in different publishers' guides. It kind of got around easier, I guess. But before that, for Legend of Zelda or Hyrule Fantasy, I kind of wish it had stuck with Hyrule Fantasy for the first one. It's such a cute name. And Adventure of Link. Those two have so much art for them. And after that, it just kind of started to become more homogenized. After Link's Awakening, you almost completely stop getting like individualistic art. So it's a shame to me, but it also, at least it keeps me from going completely broke because I'm only buying guides and stuff for 4 of the games in the series for the most part.
What are your favorite pieces of obscure artwork, things from these guides and magazines that's not the typical promo material Nintendo puts out?
I mean, definitely all of the maps. I'm just a
Hmm.
map person. That's a really hard question. Some of it will have just exceptionally beautifully detailed art that I love. There's a game book for Link to the Past that has gorgeous art. And then, it's hard because Katsuya Terada's art's still always going to be my favorite.
Hmm.
Some of the stuff for the earlier games is just so goofy. I love it so much. There's like this grinning little Link with like a bomb and like a bottle that just looks like he's going to run off and do the most scandalous things. And I'm like, I love this little guy. It's all over the place. It's really hard to choose.
Is Terada your favorite Zelda artist? And if so, what is it about his art that's so appealing?
Yeah, I would say so. And it's funny because when I was young, I didn't know that it was his art in the guide. And then I fell in love with his art independently of that. I had been
Hmm.
missing the guide for a while. And then I, like, at some point, I was like, oh my God, that's the same person. Okay, that makes sense. Just being someone, I actually have a degree in illustration, and he just, his technique and how free flowing and just his sketch work is amazing. He's just an exceptionally good artist. He's kind of one of those people that I grew up wishing that I could draw like.
Hmm.
And of course, you're always going to be like, oh, why am I not as good as a person? You're like, well, it's because they're the seriously professional artist and you're 15, you know?
Right.
So, but yeah, I just think he's an exceptionally good artist. I think that he's just always going to be like one of those people that you could aspire to be like, but
Hmm.
you're not necessarily going to be able to replicate, which is funny because I think that he definitely was influenced by like the French artist Mobius. So it's, he probably has the same feelings about other artists too.
Hmm.
So
Is there any sort of white whale you've been chasing down, something you know is out there, but nobody has been able to procure it?
yeah, but I don't want to say what it is because if it
Oh.
comes up for auction, I'm worried how much I'll have to pay for it. So, but there is a publication that even the Diet Library in Japan does not have.
Oh.
And I'm just very worried that it's going to be lost to time. I found one person on Twitter who has it. They don't know what happened to it. It was at their parents' house and they're in Japan
Hmm.
and they just don't know where it is anymore. And that's the only copy of it I have ever seen. I can't even find old defunct auction listings or anything for it.
Hmm.
And it's a game book. So basically, it's kind of a choose your own adventure. It's apparently all completely illustrated. And I'm just really, really hoping that it's not lost to time. If I don't find it, I don't mind. I don't even want to be a collector. I just don't want this stuff to get lost.
Right.
So I'm kind of like, if anyone has something that they know isn't online, even if they don't have a scanner, a picture is always better than nothing. So if someone has something, get some pictures online. At least it won't be lost. People can translate it. If you don't have a great scanner, that's still better than no scans at all. And if you have a great scanner, then that's even better. So yeah, basically, if anyone collects and they feel like there's something that may not be online and they don't mind putting it online, I would just really like to encourage them to, because it makes a lot of people really happy to be able to experience these images and concepts that are part of their favorite series that they just would never know about if it wasn't for, other people wanting to share and kind of spread the enjoyment.
Do you think
Oh, yeah.
preservation of Zelda art and material for modern day Zelda games is in a good place? Or is there a risk of, say, materials for Tears of the Kingdom to become also lost media or difficult to share with everyone?
Oh, it's actually so amazing how much gets lost to time. There were a couple of things for like Minish Cap that disappeared, and I I was able to get them online because when the game first came out, I saved them off of like the Japanese promo website before the game was released. And so I had them locally, but they weren't online anywhere. There was like one or two pieces on like old Zelda websites that all the other ones were broken images. Wayback Machine didn't have them anymore, that kind of thing. Minish Cap isn't that long ago. And there's a couple of times where I think it's less likely now that people are getting like promo kits and that kind of thing uploaded to, or sorry, press kits uploaded to like Internet Archive and wikis and stuff like that. It helps so much. I do think the risk is far less than it used to be, especially with the preservation community growing and people being more aware. But yeah, stuff gets lost, and I've experienced it firsthand. It's wild. There's stuff for Ocarina of Time that I've kind of been like, wait, I know there was a bigger image of this. Sorry, I should have said Ocarina of Time 3D. And I don't understand really why it's disappeared, stuff like that. So it's less likely for Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but it can happen. And I would just encourage people to kind of save the art that they love and just be aware if something starts to disappear online to have that and put that back on.
If people want to contribute to History of Hyrule, what can they do to help? Do you need people to just send you a lot of magazines, or is there another way to contribute?
So just get in touch with me if you think you have something, images or books or knowledge that I don't have. One of the biggest ways right now that people can definitely contribute. So I would say if you want to contribute to games in general or scanning, definitely get involved with Gaming Alexandria, because that's more of a community and they'll probably be faster at getting back to people than I am sometimes. But if it's Zelda stuff in general, one thing that I definitely need help with is I'm trying to figure out who the different various artists were for the series, which is really difficult because crediting people wasn't really something game studios did very well. And so if people are knowledgeable in the publishing industry in Japan at the time and might know where different artists worked or what their other artwork looked like so we can actually compare it to other artists, that would be great, because one of the ways we're trying to figure out who did what is basically just process of elimination based on their style. And then definitely if you watch auctions or if you collect, please get in touch with me. I do have a couple of friends who are collectors, and there's just a couple of things that like I don't necessarily want to like broadcast that I'm looking for, because it could be the difference between me paying $12 for something versus $500. So it's kind of like, I really want to share. I want everyone to know about this stuff, but at the same time, I just can't afford it sometimes. So, and then, yeah, just information. And honestly, just if you like this stuff and just have fun with it, like, come talk to me about it, because the encouragement like gets me scanning more, because sometimes as much as I kind of enjoy it, sometimes it gets a little mundane. And if someone's like, oh my gosh, I love this so much, I want to see more of this, it might encourage me to actually, go and sit in front of the computer for a couple more hours a day. So that does help. Oh, and translations. If you know Japanese and you have a lot of free time, there are a couple of books that people really want to see translated, but they are going to be so much more work than like a manga that, it's just a couple of sentences per page. There's some really amazing game books that are apparently very popular when they came out in the 80s, and people would love to play them, but that's just a big commitment to try to ask someone to translate a whole book, like 200 pages. But if you feel like doing that, there's a couple of them, and I can tell you which ones are supposed to be the most excellent. So that would be a huge way to help, most definitely.
Awesome. Well, Melora of History of Hyrule, thanks for joining me today. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so History of Hyrule on Twitter is where I've been most active. I do have historyofhyrule.com, which is my website that I've had for 20 years. I need to update it. Basically, I came on Twitter again to get help and decided to start scanning before I went back and redid my website. Essentially, if you find History of Hyrule anywhere, I probably camp the name on social media and I'm there. So I'll be on Instagram. I've started using that more. I've started using Mastodon a little bit. So you can find me pretty much anywhere, but History of Hyrule on Twitter and then historyofhyrule.com would be the main two places.
Great. And listeners, the links to everything will be in the podcast description. History of Hyrule, once again, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Before we get into games, let's take a brief ad break. Today's show is brought to you by EPOS Gaming Audio. With a comprehensive lineup of both wired and wireless headsets, gaming amplifiers, microphones, and webcams, EPOS has everything you need to experience the power of audio. Like their H6 Pro lineup, which features 2 versions, an open or closed headset. The closed headset allows you to tap into exceptionally detailed audio and seals out ambient noise, while the open version delivers natural high-fidelity audio with an incredible soundstage. Both headsets include a magnetic detachable microphone and a sleek design that has no wild RGB configurations, just good design. Listeners can save 15% by visiting eposaudio.com/gaming and entering code EPOSFriend15 at the checkout.
In a world of podcasts, only 3 men are willing.
Well, dude, what are you doing, James?
You told me to do the promo for the podcast, right? That's what we're doing.
But I mean, we could actually tell people about what we are. I mean, we're the Famicast. We're a bi-weekly show. We talk about Nintendo and games in Japan. I'm Danny, and that was James, and we got another guy. Who are you again?
I'm the saboteur. I'm the henchman. I'm the interloper.
That's Ty. He is our anime trash expert. Digs around in some UFO catchers for us. Check us out.
We're in Japan. We like Nintendo most of the time.
The Famicast, only on the Tokyo Beat Network.
Almost 2 years after its original announcement, Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp finally hit Nintendo Switch. It's a remake of the first 2 Advance War titles from Intelligent Systems that were released on the GBA. WayForward is the team handling the remake, and IS seems to have very little involvement. They've got Fire Emblem DLC to work on, I guess. Right off the bat, before I get into how good and addictive this game is, I gotta run down its sordid release history. It was announced in the June 2021 Nintendo Direct with a December release date. Yes, December 2021. Right before that, it got delayed to spring 2022. I remember being pretty taken aback by this delay. I started this podcast in November of 2021, and when I was planning my first episodes, I thought, well, I'll just talk about Advance Wars in episode 2 or 3. If you're not counting, this is episode 39, so it's taken a while. The game got a hard date in April in 2022, but it was indefinitely delayed due to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. The game was 100% ready to come out. Some were saying that it was even being shipped to retailers, and there was a story about someone being able to play a digital version briefly last year. It was re-revealed in a Nintendo Direct, given an April 2023 date, and hey, this time it actually came out. The game had a 1-year delay due to real-world happenings. I'm sure a lot of games have been delayed or maybe even canceled due to some real-world events, but it's not something that a lot of Nintendo games experience. I mean, it had to come out eventually. Nintendo poured some money into the game. Though I feel that it certainly hasn't been highlighted compared to some other titles. I have no idea what the expectations for this game are. It's a straightforward remake of 2 GBA titles, and not by the original developers. I think if it can crack 1 million, all parties will probably be satisfied. Outside of its wonky release date, it has an even wonkier secret. This game is not available in Japan at all. It was never announced for Japan, and you can't buy it here in stores or on the Japanese eShop. It is a completely Western exclusive Nintendo published game. Now, this has happened before in history, but not on the Switch. Advance Wars has a very bizarre history in Japan. First of all, this game is part of the long-running Wars series that started all the way back on the Famicom. All of these games were Japan exclusive. The series didn't come to the West until Advance Wars. However, Advance Wars 1 did not come out in Japan despite being developed by Intelligent Systems. It only came to its home country in a bundle called, you guessed it, Advance Wars 1+2 for GBA, which is easily $70 plus in Japan. And this series has flip-flopped its name. Advance Wars 1 and 2 are called Game Boy Wars Advance. Then Advance Wars DS is Famicom Wars DS. Advance Wars Days of Ruin did not come out in Japan until the 3DS days as a Platinum reward. That game also uses the Famicom Wars DS moniker. Now, you probably have a lot of questions. 1. Why did Advance Wars 1 not come out in Japan until the bundle? Answer, I don't know. 2. Why is this new remake not coming out in Japan? Answer, I can only assume the sales of all the Advance Wars titles were incredibly poor in Japan. I think maybe the bundle on GBA sold like 40,000 copies, which is not great. But we are in the Switch era. A major theme of this generation is reviving franchises or bringing existing ones to the next level. Now is a great opportunity to introduce the series to a completely new audience. You'd think Nintendo would at least try, knowing that it probably won't sell much in Japan. You would assume the chance that it becomes a breakout hit would be worth it, but Nintendo disagrees. I thought we were way past the era of region-exclusive titles from big publishers, but oddly there are still a few Nintendo games that aren't worldwide. Advance Wars is not in Japan, Buddy Mission Bond is not in the West, and Brain Training is in Europe and Japan, but not America. We're all one big world, let's just all play the same games. Okay, now that the incredibly weird backstory of this game is out of the way, let's look at what it actually is. Advance Wars is a turn-based, tile-based, cutesy military tactics game. Not tactics RPG, just straight up move your pieces here to do this tactics game. It gets a lot of comparisons to Fire Emblem, but they really aren't alike outside of tiles and intelligence systems. The tactics here are far more straightforward and almost more puzzle-based. There are certainly maps where you have a set amount of units and need to figure out the exact place to put them and when to attack what. No amount of grind or broken build is going to save you here, unlike in Fire Emblem. The more streamlined take on strategy games is one reason why the series is so fun, though. It's not overloaded with systems, all the units make sense in their functionality, everything only has 10 HP, so you don't need to break your brain doing math or thinking about hit percentages. Stripping away a lot of the more complex elements really lets you hone in on using your units effectively. The maps are clearly read, and everything is easy to parse. It's your units versus their units, and whoever is smarter wins. It does feel closer to chess than you'd think. And like chess, the strategy element can be quite complex. You have to think about the strengths and weaknesses of each unit, how to use the map to your advantage, and in battles where you do get to create new units, you need to think about managing your funds and making key units that will shift the momentum. When the game clicks, it can be very hard to put down. Though I just said this game is not like Fire Emblem, it does have the same feeling of being thrown into some stage that looks impossible, completely insurmountable, but if you can figure out what to do and how to execute on it, you'll find yourself walking away with a well-earned victory. The game can be strict though, depending on the mission. Some maps kind of feel like a typical RTS battle, where you have a base that pumps out units each turn and you need to think about which units will help win the battle. But others are basically complex puzzles with very specific things you need to do in order to win. Advance Wars doesn't rely on flexibility, but instead figuring out a specific strategy to overwhelm your opponent. These more strict battle scenarios may turn some people off, but I do like the mix of having maps where you can build an army and maps where you need to maneuver a set number of units. And the units are just so fun to use. It's a military setting, but very Nintendo-ified. Everything looks clean and toy-like. You have all the units you'd expect, like infantry, tanks, jet fighters, battleships. All the countries have their own designs for each of them as well. Yellow Comet is the coolest though, I think we can all agree on that. Whether you're crushing ground units with a medium tank, blowing up stuff with a bomber, or doing naval fights with subs, every unit feels like it has its own purpose. Not one feels useless or broken. Although there's no customization in terms of units, I never feel battles are stale because there are so many different combinations you can try. So yes, the core tactics gameplay is excellent. If you like thinking, if you like grids, obviously you would like Advance Wars. The game has 2 campaigns, which are just the GBA games. People say that the second game's campaign is way better, but I did start with 1 to get my wings back under me. On GBA, I've only played 1, so 2 will be a completely fresh experience. But it's been so long since I played the first title, so now the first campaign feels fresh. Advance Wars 1 has 24 missions and 2 has 34, so yeah, there's a lot of content in this game. Maps can take anywhere from 3 minutes to 20 minutes. I like the pick up and play aspect of the game in general. In the campaign, it's easy to clear a mission, or do a few turns, then set it down and come back later. There's also the War Room, which are fights against the computer not connected to any story mode. These are pretty challenging, but still very much worth doing if you like the tactics gameplay. There's also Versus mode where you can play against other players or the CPU. This may be the real secret meat of the game. There's a ton of maps, featuring both unit building and pre-deployed scenarios, and you can seriously just play these forever. You get more customized options like Fog of War, starting money, a turn limit, and so on. You could probably only play Versus mode against the CPU instead of the main campaign. There's just that much content here. But yeah, play the campaign because it has a lot of well-crafted missions. There's also a shop where you can buy more maps for Versus or the War Room and other COs to play as. Oh, I forgot to mention that you technically play as a CO, a commanding officer, a character who grants units unique buffs and a special attack he or she can use every few turns. A lot of the CO powers are both incredibly cool to use and incredibly frustrating to be on the receiving end of. One thing I haven't really fiddled with is the design room, which lets you create custom maps as well. You can battle it out on Final Destination if you so choose. All these modes were present in the original titles though, and while this game is a remake, it's a pretty straightforward one. They didn't reinvent the wheel here. It's those two original games with pretty 3D graphics. I would like to have seen a bit more quality of life changes, maybe the ability to rewind back a few turns like in Fire Emblem. It has a speed up function, but that could even be faster. Oh, and there's no online matchmaking or suspend points for versus matches, but there are suspend points for War Room. This remake doesn't take away any features from the original games, but it also doesn't really add any notable ones. Another point of contention is the art style. The original games have these incredible pixel graphics, so do the 3D models capture that same atmosphere? Sort of, I guess. I mean, if you're going to change them into 3D, they look like what you would expect. I think they are trying to go for a plastic toy tank type of look. It is a bit bland looking at times. Those big chunky pixel graphics with those hard-hitting animations is really tough to replace. If you like tactics game, I think it's safe to say you would like this game. If you're an Advance Wars diehard, maybe this game doesn't have a whole lot of new features to surprise you, but it's Advance Wars on Switch. Take it or leave it, says Nintendo. $60 for 2 GBA games seems pricey, but honestly, there is a ton of content in this game. 58 story missions, a bunch of unlocks, and the War Room/Versus modes have infinite replayability. It's a great game to have on your Switch that you can just come back to every now and then. I've said pretty much all I wanted to say about the game, but I might cover it again on the podcast in the future if I manage to go through the second game's campaign, since that is a brand new game to me. No promises though, I might just be sucked into these never-ending epic island battles in Versus mode. Okay, this is technically not a game, but I'm just going to shove it in this section of the podcast. I finally saw the Super Mario Bros. Movie. What took so long? Well, it opened up in Japan on April 28th, over 3 weeks after its worldwide release. Why? I've seen it theorized that perhaps because the studio wanted to take advantage of Golden Week, the big holiday season in Japan. Or maybe the Japanese distributor had another film that they wanted to release around early April. Either way, it took a while, but now it's out for all to enjoy. I think a review from me would be pretty pointless. I mean, it's already made $1 billion, and I would have to assume most, if not everyone listening to this, has already seen it. So I want to focus a bit more on its launch in Japan and the overall movie theater experience. Probably the biggest event is the Super Mario Bros. Theater, a special screening area at Toho Cinemas Roppongi. You can meet Mario and Luigi, the seats in the theater have a toad design, and you can get a free unique Uchiwa fan for attending. So if you want to soak completely into the Mario atmosphere, see it here. Toho has done this a few times for some other Illumination films, so they've got this marketing tactic on lock. I, however, saw it at Toho Cinemas Shinjuku, perhaps better known as the one with the giant Godzilla head on the top. There's a huge ad for the Super Mario Bros. Movie right under Godzilla, so you get an amazing photo op of two of Japan's pop culture icons. Ironically, I've never been up to the actual Godzilla head. I know that there's a cafe up there. You'd think going up to Godzilla's giant head would be a priority for me, but when you live in Tokyo, you just think, oh, I'll do that later. Godzilla isn't going anywhere. Toho Cinemas Shinjuku is pretty much my go-to theater. Now, if you want a ticket, you gotta buy it online. I don't even think it's possible to buy it in person there. Tickets go on sale at midnight 2 days beforehand. So if you want to see a movie on Friday night, for example, the tickets will be sold at midnight on Wednesday. And if you want to see a big blockbuster on opening weekend, well, you gotta stay up to midnight and buy your ticket, no exceptions. The Mario movie was a bit easier to get into though, since I saw it in 3D IMAX with subtitles. Most Japanese patrons are seeing the movie dubbed in Japanese. In fact, only a few theaters in Japan will even show the subtitled version. But I had to hear Chris Pratt in all his glory, so I was able to nab a pretty good seat by staying up to midnight and seeing the most expensive sub version of the movie. I saw it on a Sunday afternoon and kicked around Kabukicho a bit before the movie started. Of course, I had to swing by the Gigo arcade. Many crane games are stocked with Mario plushies. But once showtime neared, I wandered into the theater, and honestly, I don't think I've ever seen it this packed. The lobby had a ton of people, and the concession lines were the longest I've ever seen. One awesome thing about movie theaters in Japan is that they often sell merch of the movie. There was a section for Mario movie merch, and some I have to assume is Japan exclusive. There's those plasticky acrylic stands, a Bowser tote bag, keychains, and of course, clear files. I nabbed a clear file set that came with 3 files that I will never likely use, but Mario movie merch is kind of odd because, Well, it's just the Mario characters. There's already a ton of Mario merch out there. I would have to think that the yellow van is probably the coolest piece of merch to own since that is original to the movie. Here's a tip though, buy merch after the movie. You don't want to carry that thing around. I also saw that they are selling a Mario movie guidebook, which has a bunch of photos and info about the movie. So if you are a Mario movie diehard, be aware that Japan does have some things you might not be able to find elsewhere. Before the movie started, I got my go-to snack, caramel popcorn and oolong tea. Kind of basic, a lot of Japanese theaters have some more wild food options, but just give me the popcorn. I have had stuff like pork buns and pizza dogs at movie theaters over here though, so if you're being a bit more adventurous, those options are there. They let you into the theater about 10 or 15 minutes before the movie starts. You really could just stroll in 2 seconds before it starts and be fine since all the tickets have assigned seating. Before it goes dark and they run the trailers in the movie, there's always commercials and kind of pre-trailer trailers to check out. One started with the Nintendo Switch logo. I thought, am I going to see the Tears of the Kingdom trailer on an IMAX screen? But no, it was a new Japanese commercial for Mario games called It's You Mario. Not nearly as cool, I have to say. And then the movie started. I watched it and hey, I honestly found the movie to be a ton of fun. If you like Mario, you'll probably like this movie. If you don't like Mario, it might be a hard recommendation. They really brush over a lot of the world building and rules of the Mario universe, so it can seem pretty nonsensical at times. But if you're locked into the movie and give yourself over to its frantic pace, I found it to be exciting and an easy watch. Is it the best video game movie? Not sure. But, I mean, what tops it? I would say I liked it more than Detective Pikachu. That movie is also hard to recommend for non-Pokemon fans, but I think the Mario movie excels at better conveying what's exciting about the franchise compared to Detective Pikachu. What's next for Nintendo movies? I see people throwing around Zelda and Metroid and whatever, but I think the more likely scenario is that the next Nintendo movie is the Super Mario Bros. Movie 2. I see people already jumping to Smash Bros., and honestly, I think you could easily do a Super Smash Bros. Movie cold. You don't need a Kirby movie, then a Zelda movie, then a Metroid movie before going straight to Smash. A lot of Nintendo characters would probably work better as supporting characters with a few scenes as opposed to an entire movie. You could easily have a Smash Bros. Movie with Mario who is already established, then make somebody like Samus a supporting character with a bigger role, and leave other characters like Kirby or Pikachu as kind of comic relief who can bring it in fight scenes. It is pretty insane that a Super Smash Bros. Movie is a possibility. Like, this could happen. Something nobody could have said 10 or even 5 years ago. What a world we live in. That's it for games. Now let's look at the news. Honestly, not a whole ton of news recently, or at least news I want to talk about. One of the biggest news items is that, yeah, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has leaked. People are playing it right now. Do I hate them with every fiber of my being? Yes, but these types of things are pretty typical for highly anticipated Nintendo games. Stuff like Zelda and Pokemon will leak a week or two before launch every single time. Breath of the Wild also leaked about a week before launch, so this is pretty typical. If you want to look at leaks, they're out there. If not, well, get to muting keywords on Twitter. The game will be here in just a few days, and then we can all share stories of our amazing discoveries and wacky contraptions we've built. The Slowpoke Park opened up in Kagawa Prefecture about a week ago. It's a children's playground with these giant Slowpoke statues. If you haven't seen it, please look it up. It's definitely something I would love to have visited as a kid. Pokemon often has collaborations with different prefectural governments to bring awareness to the region, and Kagawa has Slowpoke because the Japanese name, Yadon, kind of sounds like udon, which Kagawa is famous for. A bit flimsy, but hey, if we get a Slowpoke Park out of it, I can't complain. It's an 11-hour train ride from Tokyo, so I better get started now. The 2020s have, for whatever reason, become the decade of the Game & Watch. We get the Mario Game & Watch, the Zelda one, and now Tetris? Japanese Twitter user Vetrix0904 tweeted that he obtained a prototype of the cancelled Game & Watch version of Tetris. Now, this prototype has been photographed before, so people do know what it looks like, but this may be the first time any video of it has been captured. It was cancelled because a little device known as the Game Boy also had its own Tetris game. Maybe you've heard of it? So the Game & Watch version was shelved. One interesting thing to note about this version is that instead of controlling the blocks, you control the stage and shift it around to determine where the blocks fall. A pretty strange gameplay deviation for the time, and even now. I mean, has anyone made a version of Tetris where you only control the stage? I'm not sure how this person procured this prototype, but I hope it's being preserved in some way. Now for This Week in Tokyo. There were two major Nintendo events that happened during Golden Week. One, the Pikachu Afternoon Tea at the Strings Omotesando. If you don't know what afternoon tea is, think of it like a bunch of desserts and also all-you-can-drink tea. All the food items are Pikachu themed and they are made purely for Instagram. It really looks beautiful, but the taste is also not bad. I think I might do a feature of it on the podcast in the future because the afternoon tea culture in Japan is pretty interesting, and of course I need to break down the Pikachu burgers. The other big thing is actually not in Tokyo, but in Omiya, which is in the neighboring Saitama Prefecture. There's a Kirby pop-up shop, Kirby's Colorful Store, that sells some exclusive merchandise, including slippers, new Kirby plushies, and a bunch of course, clear files. I think the coolest thing is that there's a machine that prints out Kirby stickers with your name on it. Though I guess you can technically put in whatever you want, but you can type something and then it will print it out. I probably won't do a feature on this one because, yeah, there's a ton of Kirby pop-up shops all the time, but if you're in Omiya for, I guess, the next few days, check it out. And if you ever want to see the stuff, be sure to follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of things from Tokyo there every day. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks as always for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app. Leave a 5-star review as well. It helps with visibility. This podcast is also available on YouTube, so like and subscribe there as well. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. Just search for Tokyo Game Life or find the links in the podcast description. If you like the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends and on social media. If there's anything you want me to talk about or cover, don't be shy. Just message me on Twitter. The next episode will be on May 21st, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of Zelda. See you next time. Matane!